Gurur Brahma, Gurur Vishnu, Gurur Devo Maheshwara, Gurureva Param Dhamma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Chinmayam Vyapyat Sarvam, Trilokyam Sacharacharam, Tatpadam Darshitam Yena, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Tvameva Mata Chapita Tvameva Tvameva Bandhuscha Sakha Tvameva Tvameva Vedya Dravidam Tvameva Tvameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva Tvameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva. Jai Guru. Om Sahana Bhavatu, Sahana Bhunaktu, Sahaviryam Karavavahai, Tejasvinavadhikamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. All right, let me dash to the loo and I will be right back. So if I remember correctly, we finished the 14th sutra. And we're now starting a new section. I'm going to take mine off so you can all hear me clearly in Zoom land. Can you help us out, please, Aditi?
Yep. Chapter 1, Section 3. Bhakti, Love Divine. Definitions of Love Divine. In diverse ways are described its marks. A deep love, devotion is for worship, and so on. The son of Parashara said, a love, devotion is for hearing his sports. Thus Garga described it, a reveling in self, continuous and unbroken. So Shandila proclaimed. Narada, however, said, love is surrender of all actions to him and extreme anguish in the forgetfulness of him. Thus and thus, let them be so. Love is to be like the love of Braj Gopis. Even there exists not the bane of forgetfulness of the glory that is his, or else it is like that of a paramour, in which, sure, one feels not happiness in the joy of the other.
So here's the summary of the subjects he's going to cover in this chapter and defining the different kinds of prema. So again, as we study this chapter, we're not yogis here, we're premis, we're lovers of the infinite. So what are the kinds of love that we have? And in our worldly love, how does that relate to divine love? So the first sutra.
The lakshanani vachante nana mate bhedat. Bhakti's characteristics are being described now due to the existence of different opinions.
So how we love actually varies from person to person, as well as from saint to saint. Different Mahatmas who are from the Bhakti tradition will define it differently. But it also has to do with how you and I approach the infinite. Now, some of us, for example, have a far more emotional temperament. And our bhakti is perhaps far more emotional, maybe even physically engaged in it. Other people, they're more cerebral. And I always go back to what Shankara says in his qualifications of a fit student in Viveka Chudamani. He lists the four: Viveka, Vairagya, Samadhi, Guna, and Mumukshutva. Discrimination, dispassion, qualities of Shama, etc., burning desire for liberation. Then he says, other scriptures say that bhakti alone is supreme. And if we're more intellectual, God, then he says that constant attempt to live up to our real nature is termed devotion. So sentimentality on the spiritual life may feel good, but does it change us as human beings? There's a difference between transformation and blissing out. All right, I will look at some of these descriptions. Next one, please.
Ujadi Shvanuraga iti parasharayaha. In the worship of the Lord with deep love and firm attachment, thus declares the son of sage Parashara, Sri Vedvyas.
So in the worship of the Lord, Pujani, in the worship. So let's see, how can we describe this? All right. In all religions, we're invited to pray. The only people who don't believe in prayer are those who haven't tried it enough. But there are prayers that are efficacious and prayers not quite so much. I'm going to tell you a true story. So my brother and sister-in-law were very devout evangelical Christians. And they thought that they were part of the chosen because they went to church and they accepted Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior. And they got all emotionally involved these worship events that they would have at church. And they thought that God was on their side. And their youngest daughter was married to a delightful boy who happened to be a Navy SEAL. And in Afghanistan 11 years ago, Blake was killed. And it's terrible family tragedy, which my niece was just devastated. They were both 30 years of age and kids. But it shook my brother's faith. He wasn't supposed to be killed because they were Christians and they prayed. Now, what does that say about my brother's theology at the time? God's my errand boy. I'll tell you what to do. I pray to you. You take care of Blake. Only the other people, they get killed. We're special. Is that your theology? Do you have a neurotic God? I love this one. How many times has some crisis come up and you've gone, oh God, please fill in the blank. Save my daughter. Fix this. Save Aunt so-and-so from dying. Any of you prayed like that? What does that say about your theology? There's a God here. Come on, Susuli, beg. I love it when you beg. Yeah, I don't like the way David parts his hair today. Smack! Crisis in your life. But if you beg, I might change my mind. Is that your God? You may not rationally think, well, that's my God. But how do you pray? Your prayer reveals your theology. Prayer reveals your theology. Is your God somewhere between Santa Claus and a traffic cop? All right, God, give me cars, give me this, give me that. And I promise I won't break any of the rules, wherever your rules happen to be. How you pray reveals your theology. Now, one of my favorite stories about prayer is about Abraham Lincoln. The generals came to him and said, Mr. President, let us pray that God be on our side. It's kind of like the two football teams, the beginning of the game, both teams take a knee and they pray that they win. That's what I'm supposed to do. Lincoln's response was marvelous. He says, no, let us rather pray that we are on God's side. So we have these lower forms of prayer, these lower forms of worship. And no blame, but many of us approach our worship, approach our prayer, just looking for Super Santa Claus. Give me what I want. Give me what I want. And then we lose faith because those prayers aren't very efficacious. There's no God. He didn't give me what I want. So here, we want to shift the emphasis. Our worship, our prayer, then becomes a way for us to practice essentially the only prayer that works. That is, not my will, but thy will be done. Like as if God's will is going to be done. There was a Franciscan priest who was the chaplain to the New York City Fire Department at the time of 9/11. His name was Michael Judge. And he was the first recorded death when the towers came down. People are running around. Michael Judge ran in. People heard him saying, "Jesus, stop it! Jesus, stop it!" But when he was in a more attuned moment, his prayer was this. This is on the internet. Lord, take me where you want me to go. Let me meet whom you want me to meet. Tell me what you want me to say, and keep me out of your way. I just love that prayer. So when we pray, when we go to church or to the temple or synagogue or do puja at home, the invitation is use the ritual as a way to open our hearts to love God for God's sake. Our love for God opens the channel for us to receive God's love. Remember, on the first lesson, we talked about Surya being one of the most ancient names for God. Who remembers what Surya is?
Sun.
The sun. I love that. The sunlight of the Spirit. The sun shines on the just and the unjust. You can't invoke sunlight. You don't deserve it. You can't earn it. You can't control it. But if you go out with a bag over your head, the sun hasn't changed. Oh, it's so dark, I can't see a thing. The bag we put over our heads spiritually is ego in its forms. First one, my need to control. When I'm convinced God's an underachiever, he may be omnipotent and omniscient, but he's obviously not doing his job. He's not living up to my expectations. So I think I'll help him get in there and muck with controlling things. And that gives us stress and anxiety and fear. Any thoughts on this? Next sutra.
Sutra 17. Gathadi Vishwati Gargaha. A great attachment to listening to the stories of his glories and so on is bhakti, according to Maharshi Garga.
So another way to increase our devotion. Let me back up to the prior one. What if it feels like my heart's cold, Jim? You know, if I do puja or I do prayers or things like that, like nothing happens. You know what we suggest? Start by just saying the words. Find a prayer that intellectually has some meaning to you. One that's popped into my head. Well, all of you know the prayer of St. Francis, Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace. Yes?
Yes.
Great prayer. Or one of the Psalms of David. I love those as prayers. You start by saying the words, and your heart will eventually start warming. If you're in the tradition of yoga, oh, we have so many bhajans, spiritual campfire songs. Or even the more sophisticated forms, we call them the stotrami, the stotrams, the hymns. Beautiful, beautiful things. You can start by listening to them, singing along with them. That's the beauty of YouTube. And one of the things that can increase our devotion is listening to stories. So here he's overtly talking about stories of Lord Krishna and all his various escapades as a child and as a young man. But it doesn't have to be just he. Probably one of my earliest turn-ons to yoga and being willing to look at Eastern thought was Yogananda's book, Autobiography of a Yogi. Any of you read that?
Yeah.
It's a wonderful story, all sorts of miracles and things like that. Reading the stories about Ramana Maharshi or Ramakrishna. Doesn't have to be stories of a god. Although you can read the Ramayana. But reading the stories about the gods, the divine incarnations, and the lovers of God can help warm our hearts. Any thoughts on this? It's very interesting. Swamiji's mother tongue was Malayalam, the language native to the state of Kerala. And of course, he was educated in English. He spoke beautiful English, heavily accented for us Americans, but beautiful, beautiful English. Michael and I were remarking yesterday about just how fantastic his commentaries are. Mm-hmm. He's such a fantastic writer, really the soul of a poet. But his Hindi was so-so. At that time, Hindi was pretty much the language of the northern part of India, not the south, where he was from. Now, there's a very, very famous setting of the story of the Ramayana, the story of Lord Rama, by a Hindi saint named Tulsidas. And when Tejo Mayananda was first Swamified, when he first took Diksha, one of the things that Chinmaya asked him to do, he said, I want you to teach the Tulsidas Ramayana. for all these years, Teja was gone all over the world. And he gets so deep in telling the stories of Lord Ram. He gets all verklempt. He starts boo-hooing. Of course, then everybody else starts boo-hooing out of their love of Lord Ram. Now, for us Westerners, this is simply my experience. It is rare that we have this kind of emotional affinity for the stories of Hindu spiritual mythology. We can appreciate them and the mystic symbolism, etc. But our archetypes most likely will come out of our own culture. There's nothing wrong with that. So Sali, you were probably raised Catholic, right?
Right.
Our Lady of Perpetual Help may be an archetype that has a lot of meaning to you, right?
Yeah.
Sacred Heart of Jesus. Now, Michael, I think you shared with me, you were atheist, agnostic, secular Jews were growing up, right?
Yeah.
Those metaphors, you don't even know what they are. They don't speak to you at all, do they?
No.
Yeah. So it's maybe difficult to superimpose this stuff. It's perfectly okay to use the archetypes of the culture in which you were raised. One of the things Krishna says in the Gita, in whatever way men approach me, better language today, in whatever way people approach me, so am I to them. God doesn't care what name you call. I have a very dear friend I know from AA. And he's been sober a long, long time, longer than I. And he decided to call his higher power Ted. So he prays to Ted. Which I really be saying, are you having a TED talk? Why not? Any thoughts on this? It's an important point. Where I discovered this was in the 80s, when a lot of gay men would come to work with me, and they had had AIDS diagnoses, and they knew that they had a death sentence. In those days, if you were diagnosed with AIDS, you were projected to live anywhere from 6 months to 2.5 years. That was it. So it was renunciation by gunpoint, I used to call it. But what I would see is many of them had been raised like Baptist or Mormon or Catholic, and they had been raised with a judging, condemning God. And then when they became sexually aware, they threw out religion. Why would I belong to a religion that tells me I'm, inherently evil and flawed, sinful? They threw God out with it. Come to study the Vedanta, and as death approaches, that old God of the childhood started to rear its head. It was fascinating. So what I have learned is if, for example, you were raised Catholic, You may have an adolescent Catholic's theology, the one the nuns gave you. Do your homework or you're going to go to hell. Whack. That was their way of using perverted theology to try to control children by fear. So you take that Christian theology and you mature it. You don't throw it out. Doesn't work.
I needed Buddhism to mature it.
You need what?
I needed Buddhism to mature it. I had to, go to the Buddhist for I don't know 7 years before I could go back to it.
But you came back and you may be able to embrace Catholicism now with a very different view of God.
Yeah,
Is that true?
yeah, with the mystics. Yeah.
Yes. Now, if you grew up with nothing, you're a lucky person because you don't have to deal with obscene dogma and bureaucratic iniquity, etc. The mind is fresh. Does that make sense? And understand, no religion is immune from the foibles of the human condition. A lot of Westerners, they get involved in the Vedanta and from their Hinduism, and then they're terribly disappointed to find out that Hindus are human beings and they're just as capable of all the shortcomings as any other group of people in the world. As are Buddhists. Ashrams, monasteries, churches, synagogues, temples are not bastions of sainthood. They're hospitals for souls. We're all here because we're not all there.
Mhm.
Any thoughts on this? So here, this particular Mahatma says, hearing stories about the Lord or about the saints may be a way to increase your devotion. Any thoughts on this? Next one.
Atmaratya virodheneti shandilyaha. The devotion for God, which is not opposed to attachment to the inner self, is true devotion, according to sage Shandilya.
Atma Vidya Nirodha, attachment to the knowledge of the self. So whatever your devotion is, this saint says it needs to be in alignment with Atma Vidya, the teaching of the knowledge of the self. They are not mutually exclusive. We tend to think of Bhakti Yoga as dualistic. I'm going to love God. I and thou. But the culminating experience is the same. In Bhakti Yoga, you love God until you as an ego disappear. And prema is not in the end any different than atmana, reveling in the self. It's the highest worship. And whatever gets you there. Tejo Mainanda used to say the 3 R's: renounce, realize, revel. How do you revel? If reveling is as he does, he has his little harmonium. He's always singing the Lord's praises. Swamiji, no, it was jnana, the highest wisdom. If your way of reveling is to walk in nature, that's what Swami Tapovanam used to love. Wrote this wonderful treatise, Wandering in the Himalayas. He'd just take off, barefoot, nothing but his long kurta and a begging bowl. See what adventures the Lord would bring him. Reveling in the beauty of nature. It might be scripture study. You may find the way in which you revel is through service. Doesn't matter. It's just knowing that the joy that you feel is the Lord, is your self-nature. That's the point. The fool, object of desire, action of desire, whatever it is, when desire and object of desire become one, the mind says, oh, that's where the bliss is. But the premi, the yogi, the jnani, engages in the same action. When desire and object of desire become one. Krishna, Krishna, Krishna. It stops my mind. Any thoughts on this? Next verse.
Sutra 19. Naradastu tadarpita khila charata tadvismarane param vyakul teti. According to Devarshi Narada, total dedication of all actions at the altar of the Lord and excruciating pangs at all moments of forgetfulness of the Lord is supreme love divine, bhakti.
So, who do I work for? I work for God. All the actions I perform for God. All the people I meet are nothing but divine incarnations of God. And then when I notice that I forget, it's painful. Now, engine for our sadhana is what we call mumukshutva, the burning desire for liberation. You can also say it's the anguish for the Lord. Or going back to the psalm, the gospel setting of the psalm we listened to earlier, my soul is thirsting for you, O God. So we can go through a stage of our sadhana, our unfoldment, which St. John of the Cross called the dark night. The dark night of the soul, when we keep on praying, keep on meditating, keep on practicing, and our practice is dry. Do you meditate every day? Yes, but I don't know why the hell I am. I get nothing out of it. Anybody gone through that stage? Don't give up. Use that dryness as a way to increase your longing for the end. God, you are my God, for whom I seek. It's the other line. Like the earth, parched, lifeless, and without water, I yearn. So the anguish here is not just that I have forgotten. The anguish when our practice is dry. And listen very carefully. Some of us are given more of the Lord's glories. Some of us are weak. We need the encouragement of these ecstatic experiences, these luminous experiences. Others of us must not be necessary. You know how I know that? Because we don't get them. For those of us who do get these experiences, they only come to inspire us. They are not a measure of our spiritual advancement. And in the end, do not mistake the Lord's glories for the Lord himself. I remember talking with a gal, this has to be about a year ago. She was saying, oh, I get so high, Jim. I think I'm getting someplace. I'm getting so high when I meditate. Be glad the Lord lets you get high. That inspires you. Its use is that it makes you seek the Lord more and you let go of the world. This is very important point. But if the result is when we don't have them, we have an anguish to know the Lord. It's burning desire. I want it. I want realization. I want freedom. I want it so bad. I want to know the truth. That's the engine of our sadhana. Starting next month, we're going to take up a book called The Essence of Yoga Vasishta Sangraha. And towards about 3/4 of the way through, there's this beautiful hymn, a stotra. Beautiful, beautiful poetry. And I'm paraphrasing because I can't remember it verbatim, but in two of the stanzas of it, the yogi says, "Oh, blessed pleasure, you have fondled me for lifetimes." Yes, there's a sexual connotation to it. Because of you, I have remained in ignorance. And the next stanza goes, "Hail, noble suffering. Namaste. I bow to you. Because of you, I have gained liberation." So it's theoretically possible to realize the self purely by inspiration. However, most of us use the engine of our suffering. I was towards God. Any thoughts on this? Anguish at feeling separate, anguish at forgetting. Beautiful, poetic way to talk about this dark night of the soul. Have you read it in Spanish? La Noche Oscura?
I read some parts.
It's a gorgeous
Yeah.
book. And David, well, all three of you are Spanish speakers. Are you a Spanish speaker? No. Very, very beautiful book. Beautiful, beautiful. All right, next verse.
Sutra 20. Astevamevam. Let it be exactly as described above.
So here he says, as all above, you can use any of these approaches to your definition of divine love, of devotion. Whatever turns the heart and the mind to God is good. You can be angry at God. Pissy with God. You can be annoyed at God. You can long for God. Love God. All we need to do is turn the mind to God. Never gets you there. Next verse. We in a new section.
No, it's the same section. Sutra 21. Yatha Vrajagopi Ganam. Just as the love of the gopis of Vraja. That's it.
Just as the love of the gopis, what?
Just as the love of the gopis of Vraj.
So here, if you look above the couch, there's a painting of Lord Krishna surrounded by the gopis. Of course, Krishna, actually his name means black. Shweta is white, Krishna is black, although they paint him blue. But what that means is he's consciousness itself. And when consciousness plays the flute, which is Shakti energy, all the forms of creation dance. And all of the gopis, which is all of the sentient beings, all the forms, love the self. So why do you do what you do? Why do you acquire what you acquire? If you look at it, it's selfishness. We do everything for the love of myself. Even altruism is done for the self in the end. Everything we do. And these are the gopis, every one of us. Doing everything for the self, not realizing that we're doing it for God. It's our love for God. Back to object of desire, desire and object of desire. I want to be happy. I want pleasure. That's where it is. That's where my worship is. Instead of what's really going on, desire and object of desire. Sri Krishna Govinda Gopala. It's really for the love of the self, the love of the always. Oh, your honor. One of the first things we talk about in my very basic class. What does it feel like to want something you don't have? It hurts. Yoga says there's no other suffering. And kama, craving, spriha, longing, trishna, thirsting, vancha, wanting. What do I do about it? I go get what I want. Desire and object of desire become one. I think the pleasure is in the object, when in fact I've used the person, place, thing, or situation to momentarily cause the mind to cease its longing. I'm getting a kiss of the bliss of Brahman, but in ignorance. Because it's in ignorance, I think it's the object. So be aware of your suffering. If you're out there suffering in the world, your mind will tell you it's out there. People, places, things, and conditions. They don't only behave. Truth is, I suffer because I'm wanting. And when I'm happy for a moment, oh, daughter is behaving, house is finished, got the fancy car, closed the deal at work, all that's happened, desire, object of desire, momentarily freed from love. All yoga says is, why not give up the middleman? Why not bring the mind home, independent of the world? And you're a free person. Enjoy the world. If the world isn't conducive, no problem. Still happy. I have no attachment. Next sutra.
Sutra 22. Tatrapi na mahatmaya jnana vismritya bhavadaha. Even there, in this condition of total love, there is no bane of forgetting the glory of the Lord.
Yeah. So if we understand that there's no such thing really as worldly pleasure. In the beginning, Shankara says, Viveka, Vairagya, what is Vairagya? That desire to give up attachments to all enjoyments gained through the senses. Later on, we say, well, we fooled you. There's no such thing as enjoyments gained through the senses. There's only yourself. The phenomenal objects, not bad. Bhakti yoga, jnana yoga are not flesh-hating teachings. Nasty old matter. Let's beat it up to get the spirit out. No. In the end, the world is just ephemeral. Where is happiness? It's myself. Mind goes out and hoits. Mind comes home, feels good. I can either have a mediated experience of that. I have the medium of some object. Or I can have a non-mediated, an immediate experience of it. Why not keep the mind home to start with? So the practice, watch the mind going out and it's suffering. Shankara says, at least don't embrace a rotting corpse thinking it's a beautiful bride. Don't dress up your desires as if there's something substantive and real out there. Jim, what about love? Ask anybody who's been married more than 5 years. That's okay. It's hard work. Oh, this job. You're such a great company. It's always hard work. And people. I love the idealist, humanity I love. It's just people I can't stand. calm, likes and dislikes, likes and dislikes. The situation is conducive, the mind is pacified, the situation is non-conducive. God forbid. Let him go. Don't get caught up in it. There is no such thing in the end as worldly pleasure. The world is shunyata. Void. Empty. What is myself? Shankara thunders in Nirvana Shatakam. Chidananda Rupaham. Shivoham, Shivoham. I'm of the form of bliss consciousness. I am Shiva. I'm auspiciousness. How many more sutras in this chapter, Aditi?
We have
2 more.
just 2 more. Yeah.
All right, I think we can finish it. Next one.
Sutra 23. Tadvahinam jaranami miva. Love without the knowledge of his true nature is like the illicit love for the paramour.
So when I don't know what it is that I'm truly loving, whether it be phenomenal objects or people, or my ideas of God, that's like the illicit love of cheating on your wife or your husband. Meaning, when I get confused, I start indiscriminately reveling with the not self. I love the metaphor that Shankara uses. He says it's like a silkworm spinning its cocoon. So let's back up and remember our definition of a vasana. A vasana is an impression left in the unconscious as the result of previously performed egoistic actions. When I've danced with the world, with I-ness and minus, and when I attribute to the world, oh, that's where the joy is. Oh, I'll never do that again. That sucks. It leaves that impression. It's like one thread of the silk. Oh, one little thread of silk, no big deal. But if I'm indiscriminate, and I go have ignorant dancing with the world, one thread, another thread, another thread. The next thing you know, when I go to sit in meditation, I've got the squirmies. Go to sit and, oh, I know, I'm just not into it today. You get up and you go do something. Anybody have that experience? What are those squirmies? Vasana pressure. What you're having is a spiritual hangover. It's like the person who goes out, drinks cheap champagne on Friday night, wakes up Saturday morning with a headache and going, oh, it must be allergies. I wonder what the pollen count is. You don't realize, no, dude, you got a headache because you drank champagne last night, too much of it. So I've got the squirmies. My mind's super noisy. I'm upset. I can't let it go. Why? Indiscriminate revelry with the object of the senses. I've been cheating on the lower. True story. Somebody was giving a camp. I'd gone up, was attending. I can't remember why, but for some reason I had to come back to San Francisco. And I won't be graphic, but I did some indiscriminate revelry with the objects of the senses with some specific people. Had a great time. Come back up to Krishnalaya. Swamiji goes, Jim, looks over his glasses and he goes, you've been with the knob self. Busted. Good senses. No judgment, just fact. Oh, you are on. Any thoughts on this? All right, last one for this chapter.
"24. Nastyeva tasmin nasta sukha sukhitvam." In the profane love for the paramour, the sense of happiness in the happiness given to other surely does not exist at all.
So here he just riffs on the idea more in the profane love for the other. Happiness isn't real. Creates an addictive relationship with them. And he's using a very earthy example. It's like when a man has a hookup with a woman and he's not particularly interested in her pleasure, he just wants to pleasure himself. Mind eats that. As opposed to intimacy, where the enjoyment is shared. There's a sense of giving. Whole different quality. I like to interpret it. When I dance with the objects of the senses, it's all about me. When I'm conscious, it's all about. One of the last visits Swamiji had up at Krishnalaya, he was a diabetic, an insulin-dependent diabetic. Would not eat sweets. He loved sweets, and he especially loved chocolate. Not supposed to happen. So he's giving satsang on the scriptures. someone gives him one of these little bite-sized Hershey's. He takes them. He stops. And goes back to satsang. If he was going to eat the chocolate, he was going to do nothing else but eat the chocolate to get all of the bliss of Brahman that's in the chocolate. Fully conscious, using the object of desire to experience the sun. Now, if your samadhi is mature, it's like a thimble full of water added to the ocean. If your samadhi is not mature, if your meditation is not deep, then you're a spiritual beggar. The only water you get is a thimble full in the world. And that's why we get attached. All right. Any thoughts, questions on this? We'll end here then. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Sri Guru Pyo Namaha. Hari Om. Oh, that's it. Thank you all.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Aditi.